Why do you do the things you do? Do. Dooby dooby doo. Do ah! We're going to talk a little bit about ethics. And it's a good guiding principle, and while we hope we are able to change your life and the way you operate a bit, it also works as a great critical lens to look at and examine all kinds of things. We're going to talk about ethics in the context of making decisions. By now, if you haven't already watched Right and Wrong, the Trolley Problem, let's go ahead and pause this and go ahead and watch it now. It's only a minute and a half, and it's narrated by Harry Shearer, who does a huge amount of voices on The Simpsons, so it's going to be good. Watched it? Well, let's go then. Before we get into talking about ethics too much, we really need to define what it is we're talking about and what ethics is. But more importantly, we need to define what ethics is not. When we talk about things like right and wrong, some people will go to morality. Is that correct? Is that the same thing as ethics? Morality is imposed from outside rather than inside. It's top down. It's dictated to you. Is law the same thing as ethics? Well, one would hope that our laws have an ethical basis. But no, not really. There are many reasons why the laws we have are the laws we have. Some might have had an ethical basis before, but don't now. Some might have a basis in something else completely different. I'd get into it, but then I'd start on a massive rant and start foaming off at the mouth, and nobody really needs to see that. So, it's all about decision making. The video talked about the trolley problem. So let's go over that one real quick. The first stage of the trolley problem is there's a trolley running down the tracks, and it's going to plow through 5 people. You're standing by a switch. If you throw the switch, it's going to plow through 1 person instead of 5. Do you throw the switch? What would you do? When I ask my students this, the vast majority of them would indeed throw the switch because they think they'd be saving 4 lives. The second part, instead of being by a switch, you're on a bridge and there's a really fat guy in front of you that you can knock off of the bridge and it will stop the train, and the 5 people will live, but the fat man will die. Do you do that? It's an interesting thing that when I discuss this with my students, a whole bunch of them would throw the lever to kill 1 guy and save 4, but they wouldn't push the fat guy off. And it's always an interesting conversation because I'm asking them why they would make these decisions, what makes one case substantially different from the other. And there's going to be an array of different answers here. But know that some people would do that. Most people would throw the switch to have the train kill 1 person, but they wouldn't push someone off. Why is that? Think about that, because I'm going to give you a few other trolley problems. The trolley is going to kill 5 people tied to the track. You are also tied to another track, but you have 1 arm free and you are able to reach a lever that will deviate the trolley, killing you instead. You don't have time to untie yourself and get off the track. Is it your moral duty to pull the lever? Now, most people say they wouldn't. But the question ends up being, what would it take for you to pull that lever? Many say they would pull it to save members of their family. But that's it. What if you had a dad who was dying of cancer and the 5 most preeminent cancer researchers were on that track. Would you pull it then? Would you have to know something intimate about those people? This version of the trolley problem gets to a different level because it is not, do you save the maximum number of lives? It's, how much does your own sacrifice change the decision making? Another version. Lever is locked and it's going to run through a whole bunch of people. The only guy who can unlock the lever is tied up next to you, and he doesn't want to tell you how to do it. Would you torture him to save lives? This is another freaky version of it, and you'd be shocked at the amount of people who it's like, yeah, heck, let's torture him. They're assuming that the torture would work. And torture, as a rule, tends not to be all that effective. I think you're just kind of screwed in this situation. What would be more ethical, killing one person in front of 5 before they die, or killing 5 people in front of 1 before his death? The last thing you see will be a person or people getting killed violently, and you'll know that you're next. Does it make a difference? If you kill the 5 people first, one person has to see all of that and know that he's about to get hit. If you kill the one person first, 5 people need to see. At this point, it's generally hard to try to keep my students interested in this one. But does quality of life matter to the decision making? Hedonist trolley problem. Track is heading towards 5 people. You can switch it to a track with only 1 person, but if you let it go, you'll get to see it do a sick loop-de-loop. Silly, yeah, but where does your own pleasure fit into this? The gambler's trolley problem. You either do nothing and 1 person will die, or you can pull the lever and there's a 3/4 chance that nobody dies, but a 1/4 chance that 5 people die. Do you get into calculating the odds here? Does the fact that there's randomness built into it change what you would do? Now, obviously, these trolley problems are getting sillier and sillier, so I want to go back to the original one, because it really shows a deep level of ethics involved in the decision making. Again, most people I talk to would pull the switch to kill 1 person and save 5, but they wouldn't push 1 person over to save 5. Why is that? There's always a certain amount of students who want to change the rules. Well, I just yell really loudly. No, this is a thought experiment, and you have to abide by the spirit of the laws. You have to either do one thing or not do it. There's no other options. Then I have students who will tell me that the big difference is how close you are to the people. If you're far away by pulling the lever, you're not going to feel as bad as if you're up close and pushing somebody. Somehow being closer to someone changes their moral decision making. If you're one of the people who use this logic, how do you feel about that? Many people tend to prioritize their legal culpability in the matter. And they will say that pulling the switch would make them less liable than actually pushing somebody, which would officially be murder. But it wouldn't officially be murder the other way. And this boils down to, I don't want to get in trouble. If that's your prime motivation here, how do you feel about that? The third variety of responses I get are of people who would pull the lever but not push the guy. Think there's a difference by doing it with your hands or by using the switch, which is, after all, just a tool. Somehow putting a tool between yourself and the effects of your decisions lessens your culpability. It's an interesting thought. Is it just squeamishness we're talking about here? Is it just that one's easier, or is just allows you to forget your conscience for a bit? And again, if it's because it's a tool, how do you feel about that? But there's an added twist to this. I could ask you, you're walking down the street and you see someone beating someone up. Do you get involved? Now, I tell you that you're walking down the street and you see somebody beating up someone and they're about to die because they're really beating the crap out of them. And you have a gun. Do you shoot them? If the tool changes things, is killing them with a gun better than killing them with a knife? You're still using a tool in either case, but you're getting closer up. Is it the distance that you're most worried about? Is it the personal feelings of guilt you're most worried about? Is it the legal culpability you're most worried about? Is it a straight numbers game to you? Is there something else involved? Now, the real thing that I tend to notice when we have these discussions is that there are things people don't talk about. And that's why we need to talk more closely about ethics. Let's get into a definition. As good of a definition as I can come up with is ethics are standards of right or wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do. They involve rights, obligations, benefits to society, and fairness. And ethics, by this definition, are kind of decided by group consensus, by societal consensus. The real difference in thinking about the trolley problem situation this way, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of legal culpability and such, do I have the right to interfere at this level? Do I have an obligation to put someone to death to save other people? These are drastically different questions than I don't want to feel guilty. Ethics gives you a framework to think about decision making. Benefits to society. Well, that came up a bit when we were talking about would you kill yourself to save people? Fairness. I guess you'd have to make snap judgments about who deserves what. But it's a more involved metric than I'd feel guilty. And this isn't just stuff that affects individual behavior. Companies, governments, professionals of all sorts, shapes, and forms have to make decisions based on ethics. What does your role tell you you have to do? What are the obligations of your role? Do you have a right to a certain thing? When you look at it this lens, some things become clear. If we're talking about, say, healthcare, do I have a right to healthcare? Does society have an obligation to keep me from dying? Do we do something that benefits society if it means doing something bad to an individual? Where do we draw those lines? Ethics gives you a framework to start to analyze how people make these decisions. If you've seen the movie Fight Club, then you have seen this formula before. But for those of you who haven't seen the movie, the main character is a recall coordinator for an automotive company. He won't say which one. And his job is to find out when something is going wrong in a car and it's killing people, what do they do? And he has a formula that he uses. You take the number of vehicles in the field, multiply that by the probable rate of failure, then multiply the result by the average out-of-court settlement. If it costs more to pay off people in a lawsuit, then they'll recall the car and take all the defective parts off the road. But if it costs more to do a recall, they'll leave a faulty part in car, even though it's going to lead to a certain amount of fatalities. That would be a business being driven by only financial considerations. Is that how we want our businesses to proceed? Is that how we want the people who work in the businesses to proceed? Ethics is a fairly tricky thing, but it allows you a vocabulary to start talking about decisions without having to revert to an outside authority telling you what to do. And by that lens alone, it's something we should think more about. I mentioned at the top that ethics can be a great critical lens to look at all kinds of things, and we're definitely living through periods where ethics needs to be a larger part of the conversation than it has been. There's quite a legitimate case to be made for not wanting to panic the public. And since I'm recording this in the time of COVID, it's a relevant question. Do we let the public know just how bad things are, or do we want to keep them calm? What's more ethical? Lying to protect somebody's feelings, or letting them know the truth even though they might panic? Anyway, something to think about. See you next time.